Welcome to the Three Voices podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Blue, and we are here to talk about our experiences that might be labeled as psychotic, including voices, mania, paranoia, and unusual beliefs. Some of us have been hospitalized and been given diagnosis. Some of us have not. We are free to use any language we want to explain our experiences and extreme states, including salty or triggering language, and some people will describe their experiences as positive, spiritual, or supernatural. We're here to share and listen and learn, so it's okay if you hear things you agree with or disagree with. It's okay if you like your meds, don't like your meds, or aren't taking any meds. It's okay if you like your doctor or hate your doctor. We respect the diversity of views. Please do not believe or disbelieve anything that we talk about here. Just be open-minded and do your own research. With the occasional exception, we are not professionals, doctors, or therapists. We are not giving advice. We are simply peers who are telling our personal stories and sharing our own experiences from our perspectives. It is our hope to share what we have gleaned from our experiences and from our gathered knowledge, the same knowledge that you yourself can find through sources such as the internet, books, and other media. We will always put links in the description below so that you yourself can do your own research. If at any time you believe that you have anything that needs to be treated or diagnosed, we recommend that you see a professional and seek out help. And this is the second part of the interview with Keven Fitz. Now, if you haven't heard the first part, I highly recommend you go back and listen to that. I will give you a little bit of a recap. In the first part, we had an opportunity to go over the various different ways that both Keven and I have become aware and involved in the mental health community, and the different ways that we recommend other people start getting involved, and what our experiences with those have been. We talk about committees here in Oregon because that's where we are based, but we also talked about broader things like the Alternatives Conference and Peerpocalypse. Peerpocalypse is where we leave off. Peerpocalypse is coming May 20th through the 23rd of 2019, and you can find the links to that in the description. Keven Fitz is a key speaker, and I myself will be giving a presentation there, and that is where we come in for this podcast. I'm going to say that this podcast, as I'm editing it, it's more like a sampler platter, if you will. We touch very briefly on things that could be delved into so much deeper. He throws some really great questions, and each of these questions can very easily become a podcast in their own, and I would like to do that. And if you guys have interest in that, please give your feedback. Send emails, send comments, leave comments below. A lot of the comments, as I give and he gives, are our own opinions, but again, these are topics that are very, very deep and heavy and have lots of opinions, and I think you could have a full panel of people and everybody will have their own opinion, and I'm not wanting to invalidate anybody's belief about any of it, and I am more than open to further conversation. So please, if you agree or disagree with anything, feel free to leave a comment or send me an email. I would love to have a conversation. And we will have more podcasts about these topics coming in the future. So I hope that you enjoy the second part of the interview with Keven Fitz and a peek into a much deeper conversation between the two of us. And I hope that it sparks more conversations to come. Thank you for joining us on this journey down the rabbit hole. And you, I know, are a key speaker, and I am going to be presenting for spirituality through psychosis.
Oh, interesting. I was just looking at a book title and it said Psychosis or Spiritual Emergency. And this author was talking about, is it the same thing or is it a difference? So tell us a little bit more about your workshop. That sounds intriguing.
So I actually was just recommended that. I had not heard about it, but I'm very intrigued. My workshop is not only about my personal experiences, but about as peer support people, when people are going through experiences, a lot of times we're having a heightened spiritual and emotional experience. And if you're supporting someone and they're going through that, if it differs from your own, you need to just kind of step back and accept that they're experiencing something that is very real for them. And a lot of times, it's just a difference in language. We are always experiencing something that is very true to us, and our own reality is unique to us. We are all experiencing our own individual reality that our borders are sharing with somebody else. Our language is unique to us. The language is often the only thing that's very different. If you look into the roots of language, it's a lot of the same things. It's just some languages are more empowering to people than others. And when you're in that heightened experience, you have a much more emotional connection to things. And I would not discourage that. I would explore that and experience that, even if it's different than what I'm experiencing, because it's a curiosity, it's a passion, it's a love experience, and it's something that, for me, I am always hungry to understand and experience new things. And I know that a lot of times people are experiencing godlike experiences, and that is often what we're called to experience, but people are afraid to.
So I have a question. Why do we as a society, why do we let the neurotic manage the healthcare of the psychotics? Because I really fear the difference between being neurotic and psychotic is the neurotic walks around worrying all the time that they're going to lose their mind. A person with the psychotic experience already has and has come back to talk about it. But the neurotic is very careful, cautious, and would like to subdue some of these powerful states of mind, feeling, and consciousness to tamp down the energy level and then pathologize it. Why do we let the neurotics handle the care and management of people who are having extreme experiences? I think the people who've already been around the bend, who've been to that outer landscape would be the best to put up the supports, care, and journey for wellness than the people who have never been to that landscape. It's like trying to tell somebody about being on the moon and you've never been there.
So there's actually a turning of the wheel that has happened throughout history, since the very beginning of history being retold, where there have been the spiritual people who've been kind of the ones who were looked to, the ones who were connected to the deities, to the spirits, to the earth, to the land. And then there's an uprising of the people who are in control and know the spiritualists are crazy and it needs to be law and it needs to be politics. And then those are overtaken by it needs to be industrialists, and then those are taken over again by spiritualists, and it's this ongoing thing, and you can see it happening throughout history. There's this cycle, and you can, if you look, it's happening right now as things turn. It just happens at different intervals, and we microcosm go through this in our own lives. As we look at our own lives, you can kind of see we go through our own changing systems. And as a teenager, you go through your own rebellion stage. You go through your own spirituality, your finding of yourself. You go through your own, I'm going to dig into insert thing. And I think it's part of the brain and how the brain works. The brain is the biggest, most powerful computer in the world. It runs on the most amazing energy source ever. And all we've ever figured out to do with electricity is get it to run down wires. It's existed since before humans have existed. The same electricity. We've just figured out how to get it to run down wires and do things. But it's what powers our brains. And we just run on this circuit that's always been turning. It's just who is in charge at the moment, and whether or not we want to bend to that will.
Let me ask you, so speaking about history and ancient history, so here's a quote from Plato from 2,000 years ago. He's talking about madness, and I'd like to get your response of what you think about what he says here. He's talking about different types of madness, and he starts off saying, there is also a third kind of madness, which is possession by the muses. And this person enters into a delicate and virgin soul, and the inspiring frenzy awakens lyric. But he who, not being inspired and having no touch of madness in his soul, comes to the door and thinks he will get into the temple by the help of art. He, I say, and his poetry are not admitted. The sane man is nowhere at all when he enters into rivalry with the madman.
Yes, I agree. So what I translate this as being is those who have genuinely had experience and those who are chasing the experience artificially. I mean, there are those who have had those experiences, who have gone through that psychic experience, that next level experience, that I have touched God experience. For me, I had my experiences. Each person would describe it as however they describe it. And then there are those who might want to seek that. Artists who may want to seek that. You can go and pay thousands of dollars to go to an ayahuasca place to try to seek that experience, but you're not going to come back with a true experience. You're going to come back with a drug-altered mind.
You ever heard the parable about the individual with eyesight who ends up in the valley of the blind?
No, tell me.
Well, so it's a person ended up wandering into the valley of the blind. They had eyesight, and it's a 3-step process. The first day in town, the person is celebrated as a mystic, a visionary, a channeler, a revolutionary, spiritual leader. So quickly it degrades from there is being told, listen, less talk about, your eyesight and your gift and your vision. You need to assimilate, stop making waves. Then the final message is, we're tired of hearing about this. Either you pluck out those eyeballs of yours and stop your messaging, or you leave the valley. So initially, the first day, the person is a hero, a savior, and their leader. And then by step 3, it's like either take your eyeballs out or get the heck out of the valley of the blind. And so sometimes I wonder, and I'm not exactly sure, but sometimes I wonder if there are people who are in positions of responsibility, authority, and management who are threatened by an authentic voice of having a spiritual awakening or having an experience of an extreme state and seeing things differently, if they're threatened by what that person has to say because it challenges their current structure, that's their pyramid of power and their way that sets up the way services are delivered.
It very well could be. And I don't like to pretend that I know anything for sure, because all I know is what's in my own head. And even then, I don't really know. In terms of spirituality and non-spirituality, there's basically the same rules. Even atheists, it takes an incredible amount of faith to be an atheist. And if you are in a position of being a therapist who's not allowed to bring spirituality into anything, and you have to be strictly science, you're not allowed to bring any of that in. You have to be this strict set of rules. That completely damages everything, and you are not going to be able to have any of your patients who are having a spiritual experience make a real connection in terms of healing, because you are literally closing all of those doors. It's damaging. It's completely damaging. And so many of our rule sets for our mental health system are based on that. You cannot bring religion in because religion creates a fight, because all of the religions fight each other except for like a couple. And that's kind of the sad thing, because when you really look at the roots, they're the same.
I was always told from an early age, never in polite company talk about religion or politics or sex. And then I started working in mental health when I was 20 years old, and they told me, you never talk to the clients about religion or spirituality because it feeds a wrong complex and it's bad for them to talk about spirituality because it's misinterpreted and they get the wrong idea and it's bad for their health. So don't do it.
So for me, because I've studied all of it and because I don't have a solid faith structure, I followed the philosophy. It's a philosophy, not a spirituality. It's a philosophy of the chaos mage. I have been a spirituality, a religion for a period of time, studied it, practiced it, and then pulled back from it, and then followed a different one. And done that for various different things, pagan, Christian, other things. And I find truth in all of them. And I've come away from it where I'm not going to judge anybody. So if someone I'm supporting comes to me with spirituality, I can embrace it with them wherever they're at. And I'm not going to tell them I'm sorry. I can't talk to you about that. And that's good. But also, one of the tools that I use as a support tool, not a spiritual tool, and I'm very clear about that, I don't use it as a mystic tool. I don't use it as a fortune-telling tool. I use it as the same way other people might use like an ink blot test, but very differently. I could explain that in detail, but it'd take a while. But I use tarot because I can pull out the cards in a very distinct way, tell what the meaning of the card is in this position, and then that gives them an opportunity to tie their own experiences to that. And then they have the opportunity to share if they want. And it's never failed to be an incredibly powerful processing tool. It's never ever told them anything that they did not already know. It's always just been a processing tool. And I've never done it with anybody who hasn't already been okay with that tool. But it's something I let them bring to me first. I never push anything on anybody. But if they bring to me their spirituality, I'm not going to reject that. I'm not going to be the counselor who's rejected mine.
Have you ever heard of a psychiatrist named Dr. Thomas Zaz? He's a libertarian, was a long time a professor at University of Syracuse in New York State. He said, why is it when we talk to God, we're a Christian? When God talks to us, we're a schizophrenic.
I love that. I love that. One of the things I like to say to people who question the whole spiritual experience is that if you believe in the Old Testament, New Testament, and the Revelations, if Jesus Christ is going to come back, how do you know that he hasn't already and that he might be sitting in one of the state hospitals? If somebody comes and says, I am the Son of God, and God has given me a message, and I'm speaking, I'm the mouthpiece of God, and can do miracles, which we see people do these things all the time now. I mean, just look at any magician who can do all kinds of crazy things now. They're going to go to the nut house. If a person just says, I'm the nephew of Houdini, they end up in the nut house now.
What was the name of the Jim Carrey movie? Bruce Almighty or something like that?
Bruce Almighty, yes.
There's a film, I think it came out in the 80s or late 70s called Man Facing Southeast. And it's about an individual's experience in a mental health institution in South America somewhere, and his ideas of who he thought he was and receiving, well, I don't want to spoiler it, but it was a very interesting issue. A lot of times, I'm sure if you've heard the term messianic complex to be actually as a pejorative, as a tagline, as part of somebody's delusional disorder. Have you ever heard that term?
I have not. I'm very interested, though.
Well, it has to do with delusions of grandeur, one of the subcategories. It used to be, when I was initially diagnosed with schizophrenia, and have been over and over again in my adult life, they would break it down into two pieces. You suffer from one, delusions of grandeur, two, delusions of persecution. So delusions of grandeur is that I'm Burt Reynolds and all the ladies in town want to be with me. Delusions of persecution is, since I'm Burt Reynolds and all the ladies in the town want to be with me, all of the ladies' boyfriends are trying to beat the crap out of me because their girlfriends are trying to leave them to be with me, aka Burt Reynolds. So I have a delusion of grandeur, or diagnosed subjectively by the doctor or psychiatrist. I have the delusion of grandeur, and then I have a persecutory complex that usually accompanies that, at least how it's explained to me.
My question is, do you have evidence to support that, though?
Evidence to support my delusion, or what was labeled my delusion of grandeur, that my delusion of grandeur is true, or that I believe it?
That it's true.
No, but it's hard to tell. Sometimes I think certain issues come out and become manifest in a larger archetypal or mythic surrounding around you. So does one have proof that they're Burt Reynolds and that every woman in town wants to be with them? No, but is there maybe some kernel in the male psyche that wishes something like that to be true, but knows it's preposterous or that it's not true for them? Possibly. Is there some place where that wish or that fantasy becomes a hardened belief of an unaccomplished goal? Possibly.
I like that. It's a good way of looking at it. I know that for me, my delusion of grandeur that I embrace, they can call it a delusion of grandeur if they want, but I say to myself, and I encourage others to embrace the idea that I am the deity of my own universe. And you are either the deity of your own universe or the tool of another deity, because I have control over what happens in my universe. For the first 30 plus years of my life, I believed that bad things were going to happen to me, and they did. And the moment that I decided that bad things were not going to happen, it took a little while for my brain to believe it, but once my brain believed it, bad things stopped happening. Once I let my brain accept and believe that I was no longer an obese woman who had diabetes and whose body was falling apart, I was no longer diabetic, and I lost 60 pounds and my body stopped falling apart. Each time that I make a decision about something in my world, it happens to the point that atheists, who are my friends, have just decided that I somehow have the ability to warp time and space around me.
Wow, that's fantastic. Great to hear about your journey. That's fantastic.
I'm very proud of my work, and I'm not going to say that it didn't take some work, but I had to make the decision to do that, and my delusions of grandeur helped me to make that decision, because to say that I am a magical being who has capabilities is a great deal more powerful than to say I'm sick and a schizophrenic.
I agree. I think particularly those that are negative or pejorative or discounting only serve to traumatize and burden a consciousness that already probably has challenges in our materialistic culture with feeling inadequate, inequitable, or insecure. And I think to attack ourselves with negative languages that we put on our heart or our mind are only more baggage for the journey that I don't think helps people for the most part.
I agree. And somehow this went from a political discussion to a spiritual discussion. So we've hit two of the topics that supposedly we're not supposed to discuss with peers.
That's
Bravo.
right. So the next one is sex. So if we could talk about that a little bit, then I think no, I'm just kidding.
That's actually one of the topics I want to hit. I want to dedicate a full podcast to sexuality and psychosis, because I do believe that that is one of the taboo topics that is very powerful in psychosis.
I agree. We went to Alternatives 1992 in Columbus, Ohio, either 92 or 93. Can't remember which it was, but did a workshop called Sex and Relationships at an Alternatives conference. We had 100 people in the room, and we couldn't get enough chairs because people were so eager and interested talking about sex and relationships and how to understand that, how to navigate it, how to talk about it, or not how to. It wasn't like, it was more like having a conversation, but it was a fascinating discussion. And we went on to take that workshop and then to teach classes to talk about sex and relationships at a consumer-run drop-in center in the mid-90s that people seem to appreciate. And I don't think we talk about it enough, particularly about relationships, sex, needs, and one's own self-image or whatever around all those things.
I agree. I genuinely do. It's one of the reasons that that's definitely on my topics list, because I feel like it's during the freedom, the breaking of chains that people experience when they go through, quote, a psychotic episode, that people find themselves in who they are with their sexuality. And that could be finally admitting that they are asexual or part of the LGBTQ community, or that I'm not actually happy in the relationship I'm in, or I'm polyamorous, or I'm not polyamorous, or whatever it is. It's part of finding my truth includes finding my truth in my sexuality.
I agree. And I think for some people, even getting into the ability to even sort of think about themselves that way when they've been discounted as a brain disease or just a warehouse patient here or there, the idea of even thinking about themselves in such relations or even having a goal or such, for some feels like a far off shore because they've never been encouraged to think about it or to dream in that area.
Well, that, and there's also those who are survivors of sexual trauma who, as you go through your healing and your recovery, and part of being in the mental health community, there are several of us who are in the mental health community who have gone through trauma, and part of our mental health diagnosis has come from the fact that we have survived those traumas. And so part of our recovery is reclaiming our sexuality.
Yep. One of the books that we based part of our workshop on long time ago, 1992, was called Courage to Heal. It was written for folks who had been survivors of domestic violence and sexual abuse and sexual assault and rape. A fantastic book. I think it's probably in its 10th or 11th printing now. It has a workbook to go with it called Courage to Heal, which is just a remarkable text.
Back to community involvement. What would be your number one thing you recommend for people to get involved?
I think the number one thing would be, if you're interested in participating and raising your voice, the best thing to do is to talk to somebody in whatever region you are or county or state you're in, and talk to them who are people who are involved, like yourself, and talk to them about where they are involved, what difference does it make, why it's meaningful to them. Although we don't have a sort of a structured academy or a mentorship, it's always good, I think, to find some people who are doing something that you want to do. And in this area of consumer and peers and survivors giving voice in the system, I mean, the best encouragement is somebody who's already doing that. And so that's what I would encourage folks to do, to reach out to people in their communities who are doing this, or find somebody that is doing this and talk to them about what your interests are and where and what time involvement and what your path and goals might be, and see if they can help get you connected. I'm always available to answer people's questions, go out to coffee or talk to them and direct them and give them some understanding of what the map or the geography looks like in their county or their region or their state, and suggest places to get involved. There's probably 1,000, 1,500 of us around the state of Oregon that are peers, consumers, and survivors who are involved in some degree or another on a board, council, or committee. So there's plenty of opportunity to meet folks who are doing similar stuff that can tell you why it's rewarding and how to get engaged in their area. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think that's fantastic. I think that's a perfect place to start. And then from there, being able to get your balance so that if you choose from there to go deeper, you can. Because we can always use people a little deeper in the build, but getting involved at any level is good.
Yes, right. And it takes the larger the community and the more people doing it, the less people have to shoulder on too much of the work. Sometimes people say, hey, Keven, why are there so few people who have been diagnosed with, I don't like the term, but the system uses it. Why are there so many people who have been diagnosed with severe persistent mental illness or have had psychotic breaks? Why are there so few of those people involved in giving their voice in the system? I don't really have an answer for that, but I do think partially is because I don't think the system gives people messages about ability to recover and move towards wellness and move towards capacity. They have an idea that they're going to be so overwhelmed by their challenges that they're never going to rise beyond seeing above their management of their day or dealing with their pains or issues, which I think is a rotten bill of goods to give anybody. To give anybody a negative sentence with the mental health label is a terrible thing to do, because once they meet people like you and I, they realize, hey, whatever they've been told initially by the dominant paradigm our experience seems to fly in the face of that. And hopefully by echoing and amplifying with the work of you and your folks at your media project will help us build a larger community to make our voices stronger. I mean, because ultimately my goal is for the inmates to run the asylum, like they said in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I really believe that our mental health director for the state of Oregon should be a person who has had experience in extreme states, psychotic breaks, and behavioral health services. I think that those people would help meet our needs best for the people who have been there and designing systems and supports for people who are going there. So that's my long-term goal.
I completely agree with that. I think the more we can get peers involved, the better. And I think that the projects like getting peer respite going, getting open dialogue going, getting the services that are run by peers up and running and available are our best bet. I would like to see state hospitals no longer necessary.
I agree. And one of the things I keep asking people over and over again is, if you're paying $40,000 a year for me to get community mental health services, and then you end up having to hospitalize me, is that a failure of your $40,000 expense that you're paying? Why do you have a state hospital? Is because 10% of people, you're going to traumatize them, or they're going to be so broken up by failed community services that they're going to need to be in a hospital? And how well do people who end up going into the hospital over and over again, how well do you help get them back connected to the community, or then they're just on the pipeline to go in and out of the hospital for the rest of their healthcare services? It's extremely expensive. Institutionalizing people does not help them thrive and grow as human beings. It cripples them, makes them codependent. It cauterizes their ability to have independence and have a locus of internal control and choice making. And we don't want to make adults into children who are codependent on a hospital system that doesn't really serve their needs in the long run.
I agree. And I also, yet another taboo topic, I am entirely tired of losing my friends to suicide because they have walked away from a hospital or a crisis center who thought, well, let's just give you a medication and send you home.
I do think that the challenge is, and we said it earlier, everybody and their brother has an opinion about mental health. And I sometimes think, and it's probably just a lack of significant political power, media organizing to get our message out. I do think that in everywhere else, in commercial society, Walmart, PepsiCo, all of these major corporations will tell you we are number one job is serving the consumer, giving them a product that they want and that meets their needs. In public mental health service delivery, you will see a lot of buzzwords and marketing that says the same thing. We are encouraged to hear the voice of the consumer and the peer leadership. But when it comes to decision making about what is funded and what is not funding, there is a significant amount on the plate that's continued to funding that hurts people, that traumatizes people, that does not cultivate growth, well-being, and recovery, that stigmatizes people, that scars people, that we have an awful lot of unnecessary power struggles where I'm coming to you for support or services or therapy, and it turns into a power struggle, my will over your will. And those power struggles hurt people and break them off of seeking help in the long run. And too often those people end up suicidal or overdosing, which is tragic.
Yep. And any level of education is good to have. Educating yourself at any level that you can. And as far as the social media, if that's where people can get connected, again, now that I'm connected, if you Instagram, start searching the topics that interest you. There are Instagrams for depression, for bipolar, for psychosis, for voices, and there's the same for Twitter, there's the same for YouTube, there's other podcasts, and get involved that way if that's your starting level.
I agree. One of my biggest hopes is that through all of these efforts is that somebody out there in the listening audience can forge a relationship and make a connection to people like you who have been there and have wisdom and have a heart, because I think some people feel like it's a journey that's all alone and no one understands them. And to find somebody who has been in that territory on that landscape can sometimes be the most comforting, reassuring thing in the world.
I agree. And that's a big part of why I got this going, is because I want people to know they're not alone, that it's a lot more common than people want to think or people want others to think. These are common human experiences. People experience them every day, and you shouldn't be ashamed. There are a lot of us out there, and there are groups of us that meet, and if you don't have a group, get in touch with someone, get in touch with me. Figure out a way to start a group. Find a group.
Yeah, very good. Very good.
Do you have any last words or shout outs?
No, just I said, ultimately the mantra that we operate with, that we took from the movement of the apartheid in South Africa, the health workers said, nothing about us without us. Don't make decisions about my services, my funding, and my treatment. I don't like that word treatment because I think it's has negative connotations, but don't make any decisions about that without me at the table being the center of the discussion. And I think that too often currently that the behavioral health industry have picked up tips from the advertising and public relations world, where they use a lot of politically correct words and buzzwords to paint a different picture. But I think when you start looking at the floorboards, some of them are still rotting, even though they have a nice coat of buzzwords of paint on top of it. And I think that we need to, like Peter Gabriel says, continue to dig into the dirt through our own experiences and also with our experiences with services and treatment to help define and push the rudder in different ways that help everybody who's reaching out for support.
That's awesome.
I was going to ask you this. Do you think that the Oregon taxpayer has a responsibility to provide community for people with behavioral health issues? People would say, we need a state hospital, we need a jail, but do we need a community center run by people with behavioral health experiences to build community for people with behavioral health experiences? Because it doesn't look like conventional communities are willing and open to embrace us or invite us in the ways that I think we need. I think we need stronger community, stronger networks, and more friendships. And I think the system is concertedly focused on helping us recover and heal and get better. I think that they have responsibility to help support the building of community for people who walk the paths that you and I have.
I completely agree with that. I think that would be fantastic if they can support and fund jails and hospitals and empty parks. They can fund a place for us to gather and be healthy with one another and run by us.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on. I'm so excited by your guys' media project stuff. I just think that's great. And also shout out to your partner and his technical skills. It's just so awesome. And yours as well. It's so awesome to have you guys doing this stuff.
And thank you for coming and talking about so many amazing things. It was a lot more than I had bargained for. It was great to have you on, and I hope to have you on again for future topics that you seem to be interested in.
Very good. I also look forward to your Peerpocalypse workshop. That looks quite fascinating.
Yeah, I'm excited. Thank you so much again.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you for listening to the Three Voices podcast. We'd love for you to be a part of the conversation. So if you have any questions or comments, please reach out to us at our Facebook page, Instagram, Twitter, or through Gmail. Until next time, don't forget to take care of yourself and each other.